Good morning. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. The Wilson Center is delighted to welcome back to the center Mohammed Safadi, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Lebanon. We appreciate his support and his presence. It is both an honor and privilege for the Wilson Center to collaborate with the Safadi Foundation, Stanford University, and the Center for International Private Enterprise on this morning's conference. Human development and governance in the Arab world are most definitely in the middle of the current storm in that important and volatile region. I'm Mike Van Dusen, Executive Vice President of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Jane Harmon, the President and CEO of the center, is in California speaking today, and she regrets that she could not be here to welcome Minister Safadi. I would like to acknowledge the hard work of Lara Alameh, Executive Director of the Safadi Foundation, in putting this conference together, and the presence of Tanous Muawad, her colleague, coming from Lebanon, who is a very old friend of many of us at the Woodrow Wilson Center. The Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars is a national living memorial honoring the 28th president. In providing an essential link between the world of ideas and the world of public policy, the center addresses current and future challenges confronting our nation and the world. The center promotes policy-relevant research and dialogue to increase understanding and be instrumental in enhancing the capabilities and knowledge of leaders, citizens, and institutions worldwide. Created by an act of Congress nearly 44 years ago, the center is a nonpartisan institution supported by public and private funds. We seek to bring a wide spectrum of people together to discuss critical issues of the day. We have a confident hope that from the dialogue on public policy issues, participants can learn from each other, the work of all can be enriched, and better understanding and better policy can emerge. That is very much in the Wilsonian tradition. Through probably more than 700 meetings a year and the presence of over 150 scholars during the course of a year, the center's work and scholarship commemorates the ideals and concerns of Woodrow Wilson. Minister Safadi was reconfirmed as Minister of Finance in June 2011. His political career began in the year 2000 when he was elected to Parliament. Since the year 2000, he has served in several ministries, including Public Works and Transport, Water and Energy, the Economy and Trade. Beyond his public service, Minister Safadi has been a very successful businessman and a generous philanthropist. Minister Safadi has also been reform-oriented. He has an extraordinary commitment to strengthening democracy and good governance throughout the Middle East. And the Safadi Foundation is singularly dedicated to Lebanon's human development and to enhancing the capability, the capacity of civil society throughout this important region. I know we will have two productive panel discussions this morning. Please join me in welcoming Minister Safadi back to the Woodrow Wilson Center. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I want to thank Hala Esfandiari, Mona Youssef, and Kendra Heidemann at the Center's Middle East program for their cooperation and support to Safadi Foundation USA, and for helping to make this program possible today. Also want to extend a word of gratitude and appreciation to our partners, Larry Diamond and Lina Khatib at Stanford's Center for Democracy, Development and Rule of Law, and to John Sullivan and Abdul Wahab Al-Kapsi at the Center for International Private Enterprise. And finally, to our two Safadi scholars, Katerina Yurova Hasbani and Miriam Alam, who you will be hearing from later today. It's truly a pleasure to be here with all of you again. Since I last spoke at the Wilson Center in March of 2010, we have seen the dramatic and revolutionary events of the recent Arab Springs. Long-standing authoritarian regimes were brought down by force because these governments failed their people at reforms. Hence, the Arab Spring was the people's response to demand change that could not be attained by top-down measures. While the fall of these regimes represents an important symbolic benchmark for citizens seeking to democratize their societies, their fall alone does not mean democracy has been secured. Indeed, the revolutions of the Arab Spring carry enormous potential for new leaders seeking to create opportunities for their citizens and build real institutions that have deliverable outputs. But there are also risks, and failure in democracy will most probably bring radical regimes to power. Therefore, it's important to understand these risks so we can better identify the tools we need to avert long-term instability and strengthen the possibility for successful democratic transitions. The outcome of the Arab Spring is not clear. There remain many challenges. The Arab Spring has changed the way we think of development and governance in the region. Arab civil societies, Arab governments, and the international donor community will all need new strategies and tools to bridge the gap between development and governance in the region. Economic and financial support is a necessary component to facilitate democratic transitions, but the effectiveness of this aid is not guaranteed on its own. Development without institution building and transparent, accountable governance practices will likely fail to achieve any meaningful objectives. New Arab governments and/or those that are seeking to reform will more likely facilitate a stable democratic transition if domestic policies are in place to support the direction of that aid. At the end of the day, sustainable reform is a multidimensional process that requires representative citizen participation, strong domestic policies, and promote growth and institution building, and perhaps most importantly, creative incentives that persuade those who hold onto power through unjust or illegitimate means to relinquish that power in the interest of their citizens. And today I believe we're here to launch an initiative in that spirit, which seeks to recommend solutions to these difficult questions and challenges that are before us in the region. The Safadi-Stanford Initiative for Policy Innovation is a partnership between Safadi Foundation USA and the Program on Arab Reform and Democracy at Stanford University's Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law that aims to promote viable policy. Recommendations concerning governance issues in Lebanon and the Arab world. The initiative selects scholars on a competitive basis and publishes their research and findings to be disseminated in the policy-making community. The purpose is to promote new thinking and bridge the gap between development and governance in the Arab world. This year, the initiative is proud to present two rising scholars in the region. In the first panel on regional Arab reform, you will be hearing from Safadi scholar, first runner-up, Mrs. Miriam Alam, regarding public consultation in the rule-making process. Then later in the panel on economic development and energy reform in the region, you will meet the Safadi Scholar of the Year, Mrs. Katerina Irova Hasbani, who was selected by an independent reviewing committee for her research concerning energy reform in Lebanon. We have a substantive program ahead. We will be hearing from senior experts in the US government, international institutions, academia, and civil society. And with that, I will now turn this discussion over to Dr. Lina Khatib, who will be moderating the first panel. Thank you for your time, and look forward to meeting and talking with you as the day moves along. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just want to thank Ambassador Shadid of Lebanon for being here. Welcome to the center, Tony.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for coming to this, I think, very timely conference today. And I want to start by saying thank you to Minister Mohammed al-Safadi, without whom this conference would not have happened today. Today's conference is to launch a very exciting partnership between the Safadi Foundation USA and Stanford University Center on Democracy Development and the Rule of Law, where I head the program on Arab reform and democracy. The program on Arab reform and democracy at Stanford is a policy-relevant interdisciplinary research program dedicated to studying and understanding key issues related to reform and democracy in the region. We started the program last year at a time when I think nobody expected the Arab Spring would happen. And I think it's testament to our vision and the vision of the Safadi Foundation USA that this partnership started at that time as well. We had a vision for producing important policy-relevant research on Lebanon and the region as a result of partnering between our institutions. And today's conference is the very first fruit of this exciting partnership. We aim to continue this partnership in the coming years. This year, we decided to focus on mainly economic development. And as I said, little did we know that this issue would end up becoming one of the key factors that we are all thinking about as the region negotiates a very key transitional period ahead. In the future, we will likely focus on other themes related to development in Lebanon and the Arab world in general. I also want to thank Lara Alami, without whom the organizational and intellectual aspects of this partnership would not have happened. She has been an immense pleasure to work with. And also, of course, the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting this event today, and definitely SIPE, which has been such a partner for Stanford for a while now, the Center for International Private Enterprise. We've been collaborating on a number of initiatives, and it's a very exciting partnership that I hope will continue as well. This panel this morning basically talks about the issues that we are all dealing with in terms of regional Arab reform through looking at this issue from two perspectives. One is the policy-making perspectives in the USA, and the other one is, I suppose, the more regional perspective as presented through our runner-up scholar, Miriam Alam. So I would like to start the panel with introducing our speakers who are going to be joining us this morning. We have Tamara with us, and it's very exciting to have her with us. She's been, again, a friend of CDDRL at Stanford University for a number of years, and she is currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs, where she coordinates policy on democracy and human rights, particularly overseeing MEPI, the Middle East Partnership Initiative, which is one of the most exciting, I guess, and timely initiatives for the US government in this period of transition. And in this vein, she also serves the State Department as Deputy Special Coordinator for Middle East Transitions. Also on the panel, we have Mara Rodman, and Mara Rodman is the Assistant Administrator for the Middle East Bureau at USAID, and prior to this, she was Deputy Envoy and Chief of Staff for the Office of the Special Envoy for Middle East Peace. And finally, on this panel, we have Miriam Alam, who's Safadi Scholar First Runner-Up this year, and she works as an economist for the Middle East and North Africa Governance Program at the OECD, particularly at the Regulatory Policy Division. We're waiting for one more speaker to join us for this panel, but I think we can certainly start. So I'm just going to hand the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Should I start? I think you should start. Okay, thanks. Well, Tamara and I had actually spoken beforehand a little bit, so, and had talked about her starting first because, yes. No, but it's fine. Though you will, when she comes, you'll all have to let her know that as a dutiful USAID person, I had first acknowledged that the State Department should, of course, start first. Because though I started at the White House where I had served at the beginning of this administration, and I had actually worked for President Clinton at the White House as well. So I've gone from the White House to the State Department to USAID, so I'm very conscious of protocol. And I understand that policy, and what Tamara is going to do, just so we'll go a little bit back and forth here, is to kind of lay out the scope of policy in terms of regional Arab reform issues. And obviously what we at USAID do is to work on implementing and to talk about how in terms of assistance, we go forward and try to make things happen, we and obviously other parts of the U.S. government as well. And so that's what I'll be talking about. Also, before I start, I have to say that I feel that and Tamara's coming in. And so as she's coming in and getting mic'd, let me just say that I feel unable to speak at the Woodrow Wilson Center without acknowledging that professionally in Washington, before I worked in the executive branch, I worked in the legislative branch, and I was chief counsel at the House Foreign Affairs Committee, serving under Chairman Lee Hamilton. And so this is, in fact, one of the first times that I've been at the Woodrow Wilson Center when he was not the director here. But I feel like I cannot speak at the Woodrow Wilson Center without acknowledging one of my best teachers in Washington, which was Lee Hamilton. So it's only fitting, I think, that I feel honored to be speaking here in the place that he led here for so many years. So, Tamara, you should just know that I said, and I'm filling space now for you, that
you did it all, right? There's nothing left to say.
That USAID implements and State Department leads in terms of setting policy, and that you were going to lay out strategy, and that I was going to fill in on implementation. So,
all right. Well, I apologize for the rain-induced delay. But thanks for the patience. And while Mara is being modest on behalf of her agency, I would say that we have been very strong partners in this endeavor of necessity. And it's been a joy to work with you on this. I think that there are very important reasons for a very strong partnership between sort of the policy arm and the development arm between state and aid in our response to the Arab Spring. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of the overarching framework that we bring to these events and maybe lay out a justification for that. And then Mara can talk a little more about how we're actually rolling all of that out. But I think, as we sit here today, and given the events even just of the last week or so, we can see a lot of hope, a lot of promise, and also a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And I think that we have to frankly acknowledge that while fundamentally we see the events of this year as a moment of tremendous opportunity for the people of the region, for the United States, and indeed for everyone around the world who has an interest in the Middle East, which is most of the world, we also see a lot of uncertainty. And while it's clear, I think, to many of us what has driven events in the region up until this point, what's not at all clear is where things are headed. It's clear that people in the region are demanding dignity, opportunity, freedom. But the constellation of political forces, country to country, varies. Certainly the response of leaders to these demands has varied widely. And so this is a story that I think will be many years in the telling. But, fundamentally we do see this as a moment of opportunity. And that's why President Obama back in May stated so clearly that our policy is to support democratic transitions in the region and to support democratic and economic change across the region. Because as I think is clear to everybody in this room, the drivers of change are deep and long building trends, and they exist in every country of the region. And so the demands for change, while manifested differently, exist in every country of the region, and that means leaders everywhere in one way or another are being compelled to respond. We see change in this region as a strategic opportunity, I think, for three fundamental reasons. First is it's an opportunity to advance lasting stability. Stability in this region is only going to come through a process of meaningful change that produces a new social contract in many ways between the governed and the governors. A social contract that responds to those demands for freedom, dignity, and opportunity. We see it also as a strategic opportunity for the United States because democracies in the region, like democracies around the globe, are more likely to be stable, to be prosperous, to deliver for their citizens, and to be good strategic partners for the United States. But finally, and importantly, I think we see a strategic opportunity here because of how this change came about and because of who is driving it. And that's worth focusing on a little bit. The young generation whose demands have driven the events we've seen across the region over the course of the year, in rising up, have rejected not only the sort of tired voices of those who told them, wait your turn, but they also rejected the darker voices in the region who said that the only way to achieve change was through violence and confrontation. And this is a really profound event, because in rejecting that siren song, this younger generation hasn't simply sort of said no to something, but they've also developed their own positive, alternative vision of the future for their countries and for their communities. And that's what they're driving toward now. And I think that, in everything that we've tried to do in our own response, we've recognized the need to support and empower and help to realize that positive vision that the younger generation in the Arab world is putting forward with the help of others from many other generations. fundamentally, as I think the President said and the Secretary has said many times, what's happening in the Arab world today is not about us. It's not going to be about us. The peoples in the region are writing their own story. And so I think that we have entered into this project with a sense of humility. And, as a scholar who's focused on this region for a number of years, I think anyone who has seen these dramatic events unfold over the last year, you come to them with a sense of humility. But I think that we've also come to it with a sense of humility because we recognize it's not our story and that our ability to impact the outcome is not going to be the primary determinant of how it ends. Now, that said, we have a very important role to play. We have a role to play because we see it as a strategic opportunity for the United States and for the region. We have a role to play because we are a major presence in the region. And we have interests in this region. And so we have a stake in the outcome. And that means that we have to be engaged in shaping events in the region in the way that we can in a positive direction. And I think as we do that, as I said, we keep firmly in mind that it's not our story, that we have to be responsive to and respectful of those on the ground who are making their own choices. I think you've seen that in the way that we've engaged in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Libya, as each of these countries undergoing their own transition process has made some often controversial and difficult decisions about how those transitions would proceed. But we've tried to engage on the basis of some core principles, including a commitment to universal human rights and a vision that democracy is not only about elections, but it's also about the values that are necessary to sustain democracy, the values of pluralism and tolerance. And it's about having democratic institutions, including strong political parties, a balance of responsibilities among government institutions, checks and balances, and the rule of law. And so I think we've tried to engage on the basis of those principles with respect for the choices that people on the ground are going to make about how they implement those principles. And in so doing, I think that we have important tools at our disposal, and indeed the President has instructed us to use all of the policy tools at our disposal in our response. And so that means not only our diplomatic engagement and our public diplomacy and our embassies expanding in many ways the variety of outreach that they do to new political actors, to new civil society actors, to this younger generation, but also economic policy tools, whether that's trade and investment, the way we engage with our own private sector and bring that in, the role of diaspora communities here in the United States and their engagement with their homelands in the region, and our development policy tools as well. Because, as we know, underlying the political demands are some long-standing, deep-seated development challenges. And we have to, if we want to help this region realize the promise of this moment and achieve a foundation for lasting stability, we have to attend to those underlying challenges as well. So with that, maybe I'll stop and turn it over to Mara.
Thanks, Tamara. What we've done at USAID is really to take what Tamara has been talking about and look at the practical ways that we can focus in terms of our programs and projects. What Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was saying when she spoke at National Democratic Institute just recently, she talked about how we in the United States, have the resources, the capabilities, and the expertise to support those who seek peaceful, meaningful democratic reform. She also said that with so much that can go wrong and with so much that can go right, support for emerging Arab democracies is an investment that we cannot afford not to make. So we take that as our mantra. And with us, with USAID as part of a broader coordinated U.S. government effort to provide assistance, and I emphasize the coordinated, which we try very hard to do, and I think that's part of what Tamara was referring to, and just in terms of structure, which I'll try to minimize, but it really is important to us. Tamara works with Bill Taylor as part of the as part of a team that we are very closely tied into, because having all of us work together and not kind of in separate stovepipes is pretty key to how we as the United States government come across to the rest of the world and to the region as well, in terms of speaking in one voice about what we do. I would say that we at AID feel like we offer a particularly, we hope, particularly useful partner to Tamara and her team, to the U.S. government writ large, because of what we offer as a strength across the board in terms of, to some extent, one-stop shopping in terms of social, economic, political reform assistance across the board as a development assistance agency. I would say that we've also found that at times, and at times as now when we need to make some fairly rapid adjustments, our strengths can become our challenge. We have decades of investment in the economies here in terms of the work we've done on health, education, water, sanitation systems, and with institutions and civil societies across the Arab world. That's a strength. We have relationships. We know people. We know people in these governments. We know people in civil societies. But we also have simultaneously recognized that we need to reach out to new audiences and new partners and new generations, and in many cases to shift the approaches that we need to take in some of these countries. And we need to do that without diminishing the core strengths that we have in these areas. Sometimes that can feel a little bit like shifting an ocean liner. It's not something that it's tough to turn that on a dime. I'd say we've managed to do that in some instances. Sometimes we've done it better than others, but that's some of what we've had to do over the past year. I actually had the benefit of seeing that on the ground. I would not say it was planned, but it gave me a real opportunity that 2 weeks ago now, the week before Thanksgiving, I landed in Cairo on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And if you think back to what that time was, it was the day of, I would say, kind of the buildup of Tahrir Square. And I managed to be there from that Saturday to that Tuesday. Again, not a plan, but I had actually come from, and I had come from being in Jerusalem and Ramallah because of conversations that needed to happen there as well. It turned out to be, frankly, very good timing for me to see just how well, I would say, just how well used our work and assistance had been. I would say U.S. government writ large, and to get a real feel on the ground for what we were doing and how we were doing it. I was both in Cairo and in Soha government, and saw a combination of what we were doing and how we were doing it. And I met with a number of our partners on the ground, both the U.S. NGOs and the Egyptian NGOs, talked to them about their planning for the elections, that if you keep in mind now, looking back a couple weeks, and it's interesting in terms of how quickly our perspectives can change on things. At that time, very unclear whether elections were going to happen or not. I would also say, in terms of perspective, that even then, on the ground, it was very different talking to people who were in the midst of planning and preparing for elections, when literally at times, from our meeting places, you could hear, and from my hotel room at night, could hear what was going on in Tahrir Square, could certainly see it on television screens. I was reading, every day in the New York Times and in other material, and talking to Tamara and others from home, and responding back and forth to folks here in Washington who were also responding to what they were hearing in various places, and contrasting that with the, frankly, very steady, very pragmatic, exceedingly calm reaction of our partners on the ground, who are going ahead with planning for elections and planning for their election witnesses who are coming in, and who frankly made me very proud of all of the work they were doing. They were the experts, they were professionals, they were fully prepared for all contingencies. And they had trained the people who were working with them on the ground to be prepared for all contingencies. And they were going ahead with the work they were doing from all aspects of what they were doing and how they were doing it. So that's on the election preparation side of things. And that was the spectrum from the Egyptian groups who had been in place for quite a period of time, to Egyptian groups who were newer groups, to the U.S. NGOs who had done this work in a lot of different places and had been in Egypt for some time and had been training a broad spectrum of groups. It really ran the gamut. But what was consistent was what they were telling us and how they were responding to the situation on the ground. And I would say it was in marked contrast to what was being reported and that was some of the press reports maybe over that Friday, Saturday as I came home. I started seeing some press reporting that captured maybe a little bit more of the pragmatism. But it really was, I would say, a several-day gap, and that was a stark contrast. Also, when I went to Sohag in Upper Egypt, I visited some of the other work that we were doing, which also takes place around Cairo, but that was more focused on our economic growth work, which is also obviously a key part of responding to what is part of what led to the revolution in Egypt and elsewhere, which is the part of what's needed on reform writ large. It's both political reform and economic reform. Because all this is about jobs and economic opportunity as well as political opportunity. The two are very closely linked. And I had the privilege of being able to see some programs that went very directly to helping small farmers get access to international markets and to, frankly, things I think we can so often take for granted here. And I was reminded in the most real possible way of being invited into people's homes who had running water for the first time, where that water was just turned on, frankly, the day or 2 days before. And also at the same time talking to workers who had been involved in constructing the water pipes that went into those homes as well. And these were projects, by the way, that were both the election projects I was just talking about and these economic projects, both the small farmers integration into the international markets and the water projects, were all part of the $165 million with respect to Egypt that was part of our Turning the Ocean liner, but we managed to do this a little more sharply than we usually do for Egypt, that we managed to shift funding for post-January 25th. So there was $65 million in democracy governance funding, $100 million in economic growth funding that got shifted fairly quickly. What we also managed to do differently than we had done before was to put that out to a much broader audience. And we did it through, I won't bother you with the jargon on this stuff, but we did it through a mechanism that very consciously reached out to, and frankly more aggressively than we had done before, reached out to a broader audience of Egyptians, had a number of meetings, 10 different meetings with a number of different groups of people to make sure people understood how this process worked, brought in a number of different people. As a result, 40% of these grants that went out are to new recipients, new audiences. And so for me, that day spent in Upper Egypt, again on the economic side, but to see the very real impact that projects like this have, again, a big distance from Tahrir Square, but with a very real impact in people's lives, connected to the things we do. Those connections were very real connections. One of the things I think we as the United States need to get better at is figuring out how we communicate about these things. Communicate with a light touch, not a heavy hand, and yet still communicate what these connections are and what we're doing and how we're doing it. But what I came away with was the sense that we actually do these things, that the actual work that we do pretty well. And I came away immediately flying home from Cairo with that feeling. I frankly, even more seeing, and it was very unclear, I think, to all of us how the elections were going to go. And frankly, how all of those days, post-Tahrir, how that whole week was going to play out. But coming back and sitting where I am now, I feel even more so that that $165 million, frankly, I can't. We're not in a place right now to vouch for every penny of it. Let me just be clear. But I think there are some very smart decisions that have been made, and I think it's a good example of putting resources to use to support policy and to look at where to best help people respond to citizens' needs and respond to policy objectives at the same time. And I don't want to make it seem like this is just Egypt-focused. I can point to examples in Tunisia as well and go beyond that as well. In Tunisia, there are a number of examples, also on the election and democracy governance front, and we're also looking on the economic growth front. In Libya, I could give you a number of similar examples. And it's also not specifically related just to the countries where there are these immediate transition and reform, the immediate transition focus. So there's been the greatest talk about those countries. As I said, I had just come from Jerusalem, from Ramallah, and I think it's important to note that the Palestinian Authority has done phenomenal work in institution building and in reform efforts. And the work of Prime Minister Fayyad and President Abbas really should not be overlooked by any means on that. And I may have a particular bias there because a good deal of the time I spent as a deputy on the Special Envoys team was spent and continues to be spent now where I am in coordinating Palestinian assistance and institution building. But there's been a tremendous amount of work done there, and there will continue to be as well. And in Morocco, just to note there, we just spent time with a very successful regional youth conference where we had youth from all over the region gathered and focused specifically on what they could be doing on development assistance in their own countries. And that was a very technically oriented discussion. And I point to that because, again, it goes to helping. I just got the report on that conference, and it was very invigorating to see because it was. I hope people see this as a positive because I felt like we were helping to create development professionals with a great deal of eagerness on the part of Arab youth from all over the region to figure out what they could and should be doing in their own countries, to figure out on everything from environmental issues to education to health, to help achieve within their own countries things that ought to and should be happening. And so the results of that conference were quite impressive, and it was with a very, very much a kind of roll up your shirt sleeves, get started, what do you do, how do you do it type of focus to it. So we're doing a lot in a lot of places, and I have a lot more examples to give you, which I'm not going to, but I hope we can get into a discussion of that. What I do want to leave you with was my sense, again, coming back to Egypt, that though it was very clear to me, as it should be to all of us, that, and it's true in all of these countries, as it is in Egypt, that the future of Egypt is firmly in the hands and the hearts and the minds of the Egyptian people. But it's also very clear to me that the United States, through USAID and others, has every opportunity to have a positive impact on that future. And we can and should be doing that, and we should be seen to be doing that. And we can do that not only in how we help ensure that elections are free and fair, and that all who abide by the rules of nonviolence and democratic process are able to participate. We can be doing that by how we continue to help get running water into homes that have never had it, and to help create jobs where they're desperately needed, and to help develop schools and training centers that are linked to local labor markets so that we increase opportunities for sustainable jobs for people, so that everyone has the opportunity, or every possible person that we can get into the job market where we have added value to be able to do that. And we can help people to develop a government that provides them with the services they need and they deserve. Our administrator, Raj Shah, recently commented that small human acts have the power to cause global and generational change. And we've seen those acts happening all around us, particularly in the Arab region, every day. It is in our interest to be part of that change, and we are. And I feel very proud of our agency and our government that we're able to do that. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you so much. Miriam.
Yeah. Can I use the podium because I want to show you some slides and it's easier for you?
Yeah, but just remove the microphone.
I have to remove?
Yes. Because you're connected to the...
Oh, you're right.
Ah.
You're wired.
You don't, I think.
Now I know what I mean.
Yeah.
Voila.
Can people see the slides with us sitting here? Okay. I can't see
Yeah. Minister, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today. And I would like to thank the Safadi Stanford Initiative for their kind invitation to present to you today on public consultation in the rulemaking process in MENA in Middle East and North Africa countries and in Lebanon. I'm working for the OECD, for the Middle East and North Africa program at the OECD. This is a regional program that provides regional dialogue and policy advice on core issues of good governance and investment. I'm in charge of the working group on regulatory policy that brings together peers from MENA and OECD countries to discuss issues on how to manage the existing stock of regulation and new regulation. And part of this is, of course, stakeholder involvement, and that's why I'm here today with you to show you what is going on in terms of involving stakeholders in the MENA region. I will first, in my presentation, discuss why consultation in the rulemaking process is important. That means when the law is drafted, implemented, and evaluated. I will then discuss with you what MENA countries are doing in terms of involving stakeholders. And finally, I will provide an outlook and recommendation of what can be done to improve the consultation process in the rulemaking. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So why is it important? A very straightforward regulation, the rule that concerns everyone, affects everyone, and is therefore by far too important to be left to regulators and to lawyers alone. I hope that I'm not offending any lawyers in the room. I know there are some of you. Good regulation breeds confidence. Confidence in the government's capacity to steer the economy and to achieve the socio-economic objective. Bad regulation breeds mistrust. But what is a good regulation? And one of our delegates in my working group from Egypt, he keeps saying, Miriam, a good regulation makes sense and achieves a high degree of compliance with minimal coercive enforcement. I think he describes very nicely that good regulation is in the public interest. But how do we define public interest? It is a very elusive concept. It's not static. It can only be defined through a constant dialogue with the public. Good regulation is based on local input, local conditions, and on stakeholder involvement. But public consultation is even more important because it adheres, and here we are also coming to the issues of the Arab Spring. Public consultation is important because it adheres to the right of the people to know. It provides a means to get access to information and to keep checks and balances on incompetences and on corruption. However, while I was doing the interviews for this presentation and working in the region, there's always a hesitation saying that public consultation can be perceived as a public referendum by politicians, so that it's seen somehow as a replacement even for government decision. This is not the case, obviously. Public consultation cannot and should not replace government. A voice in the public consultation is not a decision. The decision is taken by the government, who is then also ideally held accountable for this decision. But what consultation is doing is that it provides a forum for public debate, gathering information, and what we call evidence-based policy making. And this, in fact, is also acknowledged by the civil society itself as its major contribution to the consultation exercise. In one of the interviews that I had with the Transparency International chapter in Lebanon, they said, we have two tasks to perform. The first one is to act as a watchdog, to keep checks and balances in the system. But the second one is to contribute to better policy making, to better evidence-based policy making by providing information. However, consultation is a very, very demanding process. It requires political will. It requires additional resources, financial and human resources, over time. And while I was doing the interviews, I came across hesitation among public officials, but also in the civil society, about the use of public consultation in the MENA region. The first, from the public official side, the usual argumentation was that the law drafting process is already a very, very complicated and sophisticated system, and they do not want to overcomplicate this by adding another layer on top of it through public consultation. This reminds me of something that the representative of the US delegation to the OECD once told me. He said, there are two things that you never want to see in your life. This is the making of a sausage and the making of a law. So, by including public consultation, you add even another layer on this very messy, let's say complex system. Another argument of public officials why they do not want to engage in public consultation is that the public does not have the capacities to develop a coherent system of knowledge on the issue at stake because it's too complex or too time-consuming. And then the other argument was also that the consultation exercise, the dialogue, can be hijacked by vested interests and by those who are best resourced to express their opinion. And this, of course, is a very, very strong risk that we observe not only in MENA countries but in OECD countries. This is what we call regulatory capture by a ministry. On the other side of the spectrum, in the public widespread quotes to not to engage in public consultation that I came across was the decision is already taken, and now they invite me to submit comments only to legitimize their actions. This famous tick box consultation that you can also observe in other countries. Of course, the concerns of the public and the concerns of the public officials bears risk for the sincerity of the exercise and needs to be tackled right from the beginning, because if conditions are created under which participation, actors are motivated and conditions created that allows them to participate meaningfully in the consultation process, then consultation indeed has a great potential to increase the legal security for citizens and businesses. How relevant is public consultation in the current crisis or in post-crisis or in current transition process that we observe in the MENA countries? And I want to give you a quote from Larry Diamond from the Stanford Center. He says, emerging democracies must demonstrate that they can solve their governance problems and meet their citizens' expectations for freedom, justice, and a better life. For democratic structures to endure and to be worthy of endurance, they must listen to their citizens' voices, engage their participation, tolerate their protests, protect their freedoms, and respond to their needs. So it is part of this active democratic citizenship. But even further, it also supports nation-building efforts. In periods of exceptional policy making, for instance, in post-crisis like in Lebanon or in Tunisia and Egypt, in the absence of a parliament, I would even argue that public consultation has the capacity, the means to fill what I would call the democratic deficit. In Tunisia and Egypt, for instance, the elections were prepared by a higher authority in Tunisia. It was the higher authority for the achievement of revolution, objective, political reform, democratic transition. Very nice name. And it took them also some consultation rounds to agree on that. This authority assembled all segments of the society together. In this authority, you had NGOs, political parties, you had individual figures, poets also. And they prepared the electoral law, the media law, and the elections. And the authority gained its legitimacy through consensus building and including this broad range of civil society representatives. In this regards, consultation can constitute even an important step to reconciling competing interests and parties and the way of sustaining legitimacy of government actions post-crisis when trust in government is badly shaken. So let's have a look at what MENA countries are doing in terms of consultation in the rulemaking process. This is the slide. Basically what we see is that we have quite a lot of ad hoc initiatives. And usually if consultation, so it's not systematic, usually it's also not mandatory. And if it takes place, then usually in committees or in public hearings. Committees in Lebanon, there has just been one created by the Prime Minister on the consultation on the draft law for the e-signature. It's a committee that brings together NGOs and business representatives. This committee is based in the Ministry of Justice. What you have more frequently is this public hearings, like in the Palestinian Authority, in Morocco, in Jordan. And in this public hearings, they take place frequently, but stakeholders are only invited upon invitation. So it is not open to all. And what we also see quite often is the so-called, I have 5 minutes. Yeah, time matters. What we call the use of informal consultation. This can range from everything from a phone call to a more informal meeting. Informal consultation, of course, is very risky because it opens doors for corruption. And in one of the interviews that I have done with a Lebanese public official, he said that informal consultation in Lebanon resembles more lobbying. And I think this describes it very nicely. What we see also in MENA countries that if consultation takes place, then feedback is usually not provided or only provided at the discretion of the regulators. However, this is a very, very important aspect in the consultation process because if you want to engage stakeholders in future rounds, you need to show that you're really making use of their input. Nothing is gained if you're consulting the public and then you're not using their input. Time frame varies as well in MENA countries. OECD countries, as a good practice, says always consultation should always be something like 10 to 12 weeks. However, in MENA countries, sometimes it's a long-lasting process. Public officials can feel the burden. I will never forget was a lady was telling me, she said, I'm tired of consultation. So that setting a time frame is very, very important. What you also see in MENA countries is that if consultation takes place, it's detached from other cost-benefit analysis, what we call regulatory impact analysis. So it's not used to discuss alternatives or to discuss the impact on a more systematic basis. All of officials, also social civil society, told me that there's a high need for providing guidance and building capacities, not only in those who consult, but also in those who get consulted, and that they should use much more the ICT tools, publishing draft laws, for instance, on the website. Some countries do this. The Secrétaire Général du Gouvernement in Morocco, they're doing it. Also, the Gulf countries are doing it frequently. But as I said, not all MENA countries. So I have 2 minutes left, so I will just then go straight to the conclusion, which is basically that you need a consultation plan, that you need a code of practice that sets out right from the start the rules of engagement. That means why you consult. Is it to provide information? Is it to receive feedback, so this two-way floor, or is it to have more active participation? That means that you involve them directly in the formulation process, something that we see only usually at the local or regional level because they are, of course, closer to the citizens. Who you consult, you need to do a systematic stakeholder analysis. However, you need to do more to reach out to those who are willing but unable to participate because of geographical distance, because of language barriers, because of socioeconomic problems, and you need to do more to reach out to those who are able but unwilling to participate. That are those who do not have an interest, do not have time constraints like me now, or who think that the government will don't make input of them. Then it should not be, when we come to when to consult, it should not be reduced at the ex ante phase, that means during the law drafting process, but also during the ex post phase. The transition countries in the MENA region, they have to review the entire stock of legislation and consign outdated laws to history books. This needs to be done also with stakeholder involvement. So there are different tools at your disposal to engage citizens, like e-consultation, public hearings we have, but also focus groups, expert panels. Let me just then go to the last slide, which is the conclusion, the recommendation. You need to clarify at the beginning the purpose of the consultation. Why do you do this? What are you doing with the input? Use of consultation plans and the code of conduct, ideally backed up by a cabinet decision, helps to have a consistent approach. Who to consult, it should be open and voluntary. You need to be specific, though, whom to consult. You need to revisit your stakeholder analysis throughout the process. We need training to build capacities in public officials to do the consultation, but also in those who get consulted. You need to have a clear timescale and framework, and you need to engage the stakeholders throughout the process. You need to use a flexible approach when reaching out to stakeholders. So not only the public hearings, be creative, think about focus groups, experts panel, e-consultation. There are so many tools at your disposal. Respond to the comments received and use the input. As I said, nothing is gained if you're consulting and then not making use of it. Develop new ICT approach, and finally, this comes from my it is very so also. I think one of the core issues is that it needs to be embedded into regulatory impact assessments. That means into other cost-benefit analysis. And I would like to stop here, and I'm sorry that I exceeded a bit my time. Thank you very much.
If only, right.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and of course, thank you, Tamara and Mara. I think if there is one thing that the panelists agree on, and there are many things that they agree on, it's how the framework has shifted to focusing on the citizen and citizen needs, and how both policy and the regulatory framework are taking the citizen as the core focus. And so in this light, I'd like to open up the floor for discussion amongst the panelists. I'm sure both of you have some feedback.
Well, just listening to Miriam's presentation, first let me say, as someone who's in a policymaking role now, Mara and I were sort of saying to one another, well, this could really be a model for what we need to be doing within our own work as well. But, it strikes me that you're right. The common theme here is citizen demand and citizen expectation restructuring the way that governments and citizens interact in the region. And that is at the core of what's been going on all year. But while I think as we watch events, we're often very focused on the demand side of that equation, what citizens are looking for, asking, expecting from their governments, we also have to focus on the supply side. And how do you not only help policymakers and those embedded within bureaucracies understand those demands, but how do you help them see the reason? How do you incentivize for them the need to engage in a different way? And this is what's at the heart of Miriam's analysis, and what makes it's so valuable is, what I hear coming through your work is you're making the case to regulators for why they need to do this consultation. We can all say intellectually or in our political analysis that inclusion and consultation are necessary for stable outcomes. But you're making the case that the bureaucrat understands, that the regulator understands, and that is an absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle. And it seems to me that this really underscores the value of this new initiative that we're here to celebrate. The work that Stanford and Safadi Foundation have committed to do together is to support the generation of this kind of analysis, which is an absolutely crucial piece of the overall project that we have to be engaged in. So I really want to commend you for this. I can already feel the value just coming out of Miriam's presentation. And I think that it's necessary for us as well in the work that we do to integrate this kind of insight into the way we approach our interventions, our efforts to support change in the region. We, as Mara said, we've done a lot to expand our engagement, to reach out and partner with new NGOs that we've not worked with before, to help nurture new civil society organizations that are emerging. But the other part of what we do is with governments, governments that are committed to reform, governments that are undergoing transition, and understanding how that the way we engage with them needs to take account of these sorts of insights, I think is really, really useful for me. So thank you and congratulations.
Thanks. I would underscore what Tamara said, because what Miriam's presentation I think brings to light is how hard this is to do, actually. And it's not just hard for the MENA countries. Let's be clear, it's hard for us. And when one of the things that that I know is very clear to me whenever I'm having these discussions anywhere in the Middle East, from having been a practitioner myself, having worked in all the branches of our government, executive, judicial, and legislative, is how is in a sense to have a big dose of humility in teaching anything to anybody else, because of just how complicated it is to do it here. Tamara and I both smiled broadly at the consult, more consult, and I'm tired of consulting when you were told that, because when you've worked in both the legislative and the executive branches here, you know that you can never consult enough. And I'm also reminded of, it was actually some years ago when I was, I don't remember even which branch I was working for, but I was sitting in a very small town in the northern West Bank, and was observing, I think it was at that point, a very new project called Civic Forum, which was with NDI. It was a women's only circle where someone, and I remember coming back and telling the House parliamentarian about it, who was astonished that a woman had asked, they were very interested in what the power was of the House Speaker in appointing members of the Rules Committee. And because at that point, then it was the mid 1990s, and at that point, how the Palestinian Legislative Council was being put together was critical, and what the powers were going to be of the Speaker was critical, and in terms of the Palestinian citizens, they were critically aware of what those powers were going to be and what their roles were of shaping it. And I dare say, I don't know how many Americans would be able to tell you what the House Rules Committee was, let alone how the Speaker's role played in that. And having worked in the House, I was acutely aware of that, and was frankly astonished that the question was being asked. The House parliamentarian beamed from ear to ear that anyone would know what his role was, and the parliamentarians and speakers and all of that. But it was a very, very good lesson to me. And of the power that citizens have as these legislatures are being put together, and the role that can be placed, and the power of consultations that are, frankly, can be much greater than we have in this country at this point. And so to understand what those different perspectives are, which means that what you're doing is so important at this point, and what what Safi Foundation is doing in being able to sponsor this kind of work, which also it means that it behooves us to kind of absorb this, figure out how, with our organizations who are out there doing a lot of work in the field, also to kind of constantly be educating themselves on the new work and scholarship that's out there. We need to have kind of a constantly generating cycle on this at all times. So,
thank you. And of course, we're always very pleased to hear when policymakers say they want scholars to input the policy-making process. This is something we certainly strive to do. Miriam, did you have any comments before we open up?
No, I think we can.
Okay, in this case, we have around 25 minutes for questions, and I'm sure a lot of you in the audience. Okay, already there's. Please wait for a microphone, by the way. Please introduce yourself before you ask.
Thank you. My name is Daniel Mora. I'm from Johns Hopkins University SAIS. The question is about women's rights, especially in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. In Tunisia, last week, the dean office at the university was occupied, and the dean was beaten by the Salafists. I don't go deep because I think everyone knows or should know what's happening in Tunisia about pressure from Islamists. In Libya, the first act of the new government was to put back the Sharia law, expliciting putting back the polygamy in the country. In Egypt, it's forbidden to put women pictures in the electoral posters for the elections. So how do you react to this with the analysis on Sunday? Last Sunday on the Washington Post was a full page, very critical about what's happening in the Arab Spring country. Thank you.
Well, certainly from our perspective, not only the inclusion of women, but women's equal participation and equal status is an essential component of democratic health, as well as prospects for economic development. And I think Secretary Clinton has been outspoken on this issue, not only with respect to transitions in the Middle East, but globally, and for many, many years. This is a core commitment for us. And so as we've engaged with new political actors and with older political actors, and as we've engaged in terms of the programs that we're implementing on the ground, the issue of women's inclusion, women's equality, women's empowerment has been a central concern for us. It's, for example, when we're talking to political parties, we want to understand who they are, where they're coming from, what their core priorities are, what their sort of ideological framework is. But we also want to communicate our own core concerns and our own core commitments with respect to democracy and what we expect from political parties who want to commit themselves to being constructive actors in a democratic process. And what we say is, number one, obvious commitment to nonviolence and a rejection of violence as a way to achieve your political goals, a commitment to the democratic rules of the game, even when you lose, a commitment to the rule of law, and to equality under the law for everybody in your society, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, whether they're female or male, no matter what ethnicity or sect they may come from. The equality of citizenship is a core principle of democracy. And so that's part of our central message in our engagements. I think, though, I guess I would take issue a little bit with your characterization, which is that while there's no question that there are voices emerging in these societies that are challenging women's status, and that's something that we all have to attend to, there's no question. I think you see voices pushing in the other direction as well. I think in Tunisia, the Nahda party, which came out of the election with a plurality, almost immediately had to come out and say, and we're not going to roll back any of the laws or regulations related to women's equality in Tunisia, and have built a coalition with a secular party that's deeply committed to those policy goals. And like all the other parties, had gender parity in their lists for the election because that was a requirement. In Libya, the statements by members of the Transitional National Council were statements. They were not laws or policies. And I noticed that one of the first demonstrations in Libya immediately after liberation was a demonstration by women activists demanding the income violence against women during the course of the Civil War. So you have that advocacy, which is crucial and which we seek to support. And likewise in Egypt, I think you see now and you're going to see a lot of contention around gender issues. I think there's been an unfortunate backlash in some ways among some political voices, but women's organizations, women activists, and women's voices are strong and growing, and I think that we're looking to do what we can to support their work going forward as well.
I just want to give one anecdote, which was interesting to me. When I was in Soha Government in the water company where I stopped at first before we went out to see these projects in the field. And there was a woman who was fairly senior in the company. She was responsible for what had changed a lot of the service delivery. When we went down to the kind of service center where people could actually come in and bring their complaints and their ability to get service turned on in their homes, or if they had a problem with service delivery, which before had taken 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get stuff done, they could come in and file complaints or talk to someone and have things changed within a day or two, which had been unheard of before. She was covered. I don't know what her degree of observance was, but I was talking with her back and forth. She ended up wanting to take me around at that point to several different parts of the company and introduce me at that point and point out the women who were running each of the offices or administrative parts of the company that we were going through, and through a translator describe what was happening in each of the places, which was clearly had not been part of the tour plan. It was a man who ran the company, and she was clearly subverting the plan to some extent. But it was also clear that he and others were very impressed with the work that she had done, and were telling me about it. As was she. She was a longtime employee of the company and was responsible for this turnaround in the service delivery center. She was clearly a long time and impressive employee, and as we were walking out, and so I ended up spending a fair amount of time with her in the company and saw the role of women in this water company, which was significant, and it was in a pretty traditional place as well, and a very impoverished place, and it had made a real difference in people's lives. So I was thinking I was going to tell her just how impressed I was with obviously the work of the company and her work, and before I could say that, as we were walking out to the car because I had to leave, she looked over at me and said, "I have to tell you, I'm so proud of you." She was an older woman and she'd worked there, but it was interesting to me in terms of where she was, what she had done, and clearly what the women in this company had done and in this region. And I recognize there's a big, and it was very clear to me that it was a few days before the election, and there are a lot of challenges there, and there's a lot of work that we have to do, and a lot of ways that we need to play a role in supporting and consciously watching for the things we can do and support. And it also showed me there are a lot of very strong women there who are looking for ways themselves to support themselves and to support other women who are out there.
And to support you.
As well. So.
Okay, thank you. I see lots of hands. There was a gentleman at the back.
Stanley Kober. This will be for Tammy. The philosopher J.R. Tolman wrote about totalitarian democracy. Is that what we are seeing emerge in the Middle East? Is that what the elections in Egypt signify, with the Salafis already getting 25% of the vote? What would then prevent the emergence of a totalitarian democracy?
Well, look, Stan, I think in any democracy there is the potential for voices and forces to emerge that can threaten the democratic process and can threaten democratic principles. But I think we're in very, very early days here. And I think whether it's a new democracy, an emerging democracy, or a well-established democracy, it's fundamentally the responsibility and the role of citizens within that society and good, well-designed democratic institutions to protect the democratic process against those who would seek to use it in order to subvert democracy. But, you know, we have debates in our own country, and I don't want to minimize this, but we have debates in our country where voices emerge that are seen by many as threatening of core democratic values. You see in other countries the rise of, you know, ultra-nationalist parties or other parties that are seen as fringe. And I think that every democracy contains within it, because of, if it's got a core commitment to civil liberties, it contains within it the potential for those to emerge who want to exploit the process or subvert the process. And so the majority who value that democratic process have to protect it. And I think that the special challenge in emerging democracies is to ensure that those who have undertaken the work to generate the political transition and have laid out their desire for a democratic path, the challenge is for them to be able to implement that in good democratic institutions. And where we are now in each of these societies is the phase of rulemaking and institution building. And so for those of us outside who care about the fate of these processes, you know, I think that's what we're paying very close attention to, and that's what we're looking to support, is a process of rulemaking and institution building that is inclusive and that pays attention to those core democratic principles that I mentioned earlier of pluralism and tolerance. And I think that if we can help those within these societies successfully develop those institutions, then they'll have a very good shot.
Gentleman there.
My name's Ralph Marlatt with RJM Consultants. You talked about consulting citizens, which has to lead to consult citizen advocacy. My question to you is, what do you see as the role, especially with Miriam and the others, of trade and professional and business associations and their role, because they have collective voice representing thousands of citizens. And how do you see that role? Are you excluding, are you including professional and business associations?
They are, of course, included into the consultation, and they are making a very, very important part within the exercise. In some of the OECD countries, we even see that next to the on top of consultation with civil society, they have what we call advisory body established. And in this advisory bodies, you have representatives from business association, from NGOs, so from the larger interest groups. So. But of course, they are a very, very important stakeholder, and they need to be included. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Whoa, Abdul Wahab.
Yes, I'm Abdul Wahab Al-Kibsi with the Center for International Private Enterprise. I just want to start by acknowledging Lara Alame. She's just an amazing job. It's so easy to partner with you, Lara. Call me anytime you want to partner again. Thank you very much. And also to express our appreciation for the partnership with the Safadi Stanford Initiative for its first year. It's amazing to work with you. And back to the first question, there are some powerful women in the Arab world, and these two are just examples of that. Let me tell you, I'm a junior partner in this. I just want to come back to the theme of consultation and the theme of citizen demand and what we talked about making policy here in the United States. There are lots of factors in making this policy like that. We're aware of it. I mean, there are bilateral relations, diplomacy. There's also development, economic development, political development, governance, poverty alleviation, and then there's counterterrorism. Sometimes these factors are aligned, sometimes they're conflicting. Post-Arab Spring, do you feel these factors are more aligned or less aligned? Do they present more problems for you or they make your job easier? Thank you.
Well, Abdu, great question, and I think that, you know, obviously the answer is it depends, right? But, you know, I think fundamentally there are two reasons why I would say that in many ways it's easier. Number one is something that I said in my opening remarks, that part of the power of these events is that people in the region were rejecting those who said that that violent extremism, that terrorism is the way to achieve change. And they've demonstrated that there is a way to achieve change through peaceful, popular action. And now through the political process, through free and fair elections. And that's incredibly powerful. Nothing succeeds like success, right? But the other reason that I think there's an opportunity here for things to be more closely aligned is because within these societies, people are demanding the development of legal frameworks that are protective of their rights and protective of national security. In other words, I'm a citizen, I care about the security of my country, and I care about my dignity as an individual and the dignity of my community, and you, government, your job is to take care of all of that in an appropriate way, and I'm going to hold you accountable for that. Now, within that framework, it is easier in many ways to have a discussion, the discussion that we have been having with partners in the region and around the world ever since 9/11, which is how do you pursue counterterrorism and how do you pursue national security within the framework of the rule of law, within a framework that's protective of individual rights. And, you know, I think if you listen to John Brennan, that is very much, you know, the lens through which he engages in all of his work in our region and globally. So in many ways for us, we have opportunities now to advance the ball in that regard in ways that we couldn't before.
And the one thing I would add to that is that in terms of our internal organization, though it may not always appear that way, I think it's forced us to accelerate what we were already working to do in terms of turning that ocean liner or whatever metaphor you use. The internal coordination, Tamar and I were joking a little bit about the models that the charts that you put on, but in a lot of ways you could apply that to our internal coordination or consultation processes. But that I hope, have been working to do a better job internally of how the different parts of our government work together, talk together, develop policy together, in terms of the kind of famous defense diplomacy development teams and the smart diplomacy. All of that, I would say, has been on an accelerated track with the post-January developments in the Arab world that frankly apply a lot more broadly. Yeah. So I think that's given us a new impetus and a new opportunity to do the things, frankly, that we've needed to do all along.
Yeah, it's funny. People say that our policy process always works best in a crisis because it sort of focuses everyone. And but I think Mara is absolutely right that there's sort of a degree of coherence and tight coordination across the interagency on this set of issues right now that was compelled by the speed of events, but that I think will serve us very well going forward.
Amal.
Hi, my name is Amal Mudallali. I'm advisor to Prime Minister Hariri. My question is for you, Mara, about Lebanon. Could you please give us an assessment of the USAID program in Lebanon? Are you able to work in all of Lebanon? What are the obstacles that you face? What's your priority in Lebanon? How you're doing? And maybe Ms. Witz can tell us also, what's your assessment also of the Lebanese democracy, especially under this current government? Thank you.
Well, yeah. it's a big question, and I think that we're going to have to be probably maybe more narrowly focused than you might like with that question going forward. It's good and a fair question. We are focusing in a variety of areas right now, and we are doing as much as we can in non-governmental space, and have been working in health and education, in environmental areas, and we've also been working very closely with Congress, and so some of our funding has taken a little bit more time to go forward as we've been in this transitional period, and so we are still moving. We've been doing work in economic growth as well as in the democracy governance area in Lebanon, and so we're continuing to go forward. We have a continuing commitment there, and we'll be continuing to work there. But this is one area where the very close consultation that you talk about between our executive and legislative branches is critical as we move forward on the development side, because we very much, we will continue to move forward, but we need to have Congress with us as we go forward. No, but the but here is for the assistance to continue at the levels it goes forward with, and that flow to continue. We very much need to work in partnership with Congress so that the flow of assistance at the levels that it goes forward with requires an ongoing dialogue. So it's not so much that the levels change, it's just that the flow requires constant conversation.
Yeah, I think I would say too, Lebanon is one of those places, where we have a longstanding USAID program, and we also have a lot of other programs, and so the assistance coordination has also been very important, I think. And the work that we're doing with the civil society sector in Lebanon, and then the work that Lebanese are doing in terms of institutional and legal and regulatory reform. And I mean, just to go a little ways back, not too far back, but if you look at a lot of the work that was done in electoral reform prior to the 2009 legislative elections, for example, that was a real example of what Miriam's talking about, involving a very intensive process of civil society government consultation. And I would like to think, I don't think that we drove any of that, but I would like to think that some of the work that we've done over the years with Lebanese civil society groups helped them to organize, to build that coalition and to come together around a core set of demands in their engagement with government. It helped to produce some of those outcomes. And I think, when I look at the trends within Lebanese civil society, one of the things that I find very encouraging is increasingly civil society organizations working together across communal lines, bound by this sense of common citizenship and common destiny. And to me, that is, central to the success of Lebanese democracy, that growing sense of common citizenship, especially among the younger generation.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Benjamin Tu, a retired U.S. diplomat. There have been several references to reallocation of resources and working with Congress and so on. This is a very tough environment where resources are going to be very hard to get. Could you give us a little bit of a sense of the baseline where you started before the Arab Spring, where you are now, and what the prospects might be for working successfully with Congress to at least meet your minimum needs?
Well, thanks. I think that's a really, really important issue to raise. If you think back to the United States' response to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the fact that the Freedom Support Act and all of the attendant resources and authorities were passed within weeks, and look at where we are today. We're in a very different budget environment. We're in the United States, and indeed a number of our international partners are facing difficult economic circumstances at home. And what that means for us in organizing our response is, number one, we have to be extremely disciplined in how we engage and the types of programmatic support that we put into place. We have to be really efficient in the way that we use our resources. It also requires us, in a way that I think, again, coming back to some of the other things we said, will have, I think, beneficial implications over the longer term. It requires us to work very closely with our international partners. And actually, the program that Miriam works for is a great example of this, the MENA OECD program, which is a program that we've supported for a number of years, that's sort of been laboring in the vineyards, building consensus on governance and investment reforms across the region. And this is something that we support and that other Western governments support. And as we move forward, whether it's through the G8 Deauville partnership, or in the US-EU relationship, or in other ways that we bring together constellations of important donor nations or countries that have an important stake in what happens in the Middle East, we can use instruments like the OECD to help leverage the resources that each of us is able to bring to bear in order to magnify and maximize our joint impact. I think there's another aspect of this too, which is that it's really not just about the aid dollars. I mean, believe me, the aid dollars are important, and they allow us to do things that we believe are really crucial to the trajectory, both political and economic trajectory, as Mara was describing. But it's also about other aspects of our economic policy, and particularly trade and investment policy. Because part of, I think, what separates what's happening in the Middle East today from what happened in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union is that those states in 1989 and moving forward knew where they wanted to go, and they knew what they wanted to be. There was the EU, and there was NATO, and there were structures there, and it was very clear, here's the target, and here are the benchmarks you need to hit in order to get to that goal. The states of the Middle East, I think, very much are still figuring out where they want to end up. And part of the role that those of us outside who play is in helping to create frameworks that will help these states stay on the road to democratic reform, even though it's a bumpy and difficult road. And assistance dollars alone are woefully insufficient to that task. We have to look at all of our policy tools, and Undersecretary Hormats will be here later in the morning, and that's one of the things that he's very focused on.
Mara, do you have any last comments before we close the panel?
No, I think I'm set.
Well, on that note, please join me in thanking our speakers today for what I think has been a wonderful and encouraging and refreshing